Canadian Coast Guard emergency. What's your location?
There's blood in the water! He's not coming up! Please, send someone now!
My friend fell overboard. There's an orca circling. Hurry! We're 5 nautical miles south of the Nile. Possible Morgan attack. Request immediate assistance. Gear up! We're going in as soon as we reach the site.
Within moments, the call became a desperate plea. The witness's voice cracked, describing a violent tail strike that sent waves crashing between the men, separating them in seconds. As rescue crews raced through rising swells, the ocean's calm facade was gone, replaced by a raw, unpredictable force. What happened that day would ignite debates across the country, shake a coastal community to its core, and leave an unforgettable mark on all who saw it. If stories like this move you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear the truth the ocean tries to tell us. August 9, 2025. The first light of day had only just begun to touch the waters off the southern coast of Vancouver Island. A dense blanket of fog hung low, curling over the gentle ripples like a slow-moving breath. The small wooden boat, Blue Horizon, cut through the still water at an unhurried pace, its bow parting the mist. On board were Michael Harris, 47, and Daniel Lee, 45, two friends who had been fishing together for years. This was more than just a pastime for them. It had become a quiet ritual, a way to close out the week and reset their minds. That morning, though, felt different. The ocean lay still in a way that was almost unsettling. There were no seagulls circling overhead, no faint splashes from fish breaking the surface. Only the steady hum of the small outboard motor and the distant muffled echo of waves meeting the unseen shore. Daniel, always the more optimistic of the two, grinned as he glanced at the horizon. "With the water this calm, I bet the fish are going to bite all morning," he said. His voice carried easily across the deck, breaking the heavy silence. Michael forced a small smile but kept his eyes on the water. Something about the absence of sound gnawed at him. It was as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. He adjusted the throttle, slowing the boat as they reached a spot he knew well about 5 nautical miles from shore. Here, the water was usually teeming with life, and the two men had pulled in more than a few prize catches over the years. Daniel began unpacking their gear, setting out the rods, bait, and cooler with practiced ease. The smell of salt mixed with the faint tang of the bait, and for a moment, it felt like any other trip. Michael cut the engine, and the sudden quiet was complete. The only sound was the faint lapping of water against the hull. As Michael reached for his rod, something shifted in the corner of his vision. A dark shape moved beneath the surface, not drifting, but gliding with purpose. It was large, far larger than anything he'd expect to see this close to shore. He leaned over slightly, squinting through the haze, then, breaking the stillness. A tall dorsal fin rose cleanly from the water, slicing upward like a blade. Daniel hadn't noticed yet. He was focused on baiting his line. But Michael's gaze stayed locked on that fin. It was moving toward them. The water around it rippled and swirled, and the fog seemed to pull back just enough to reveal a sudden burst of spray. The moment was brief but sharp in Michael's mind. The fin, the dark shape, the flash of white markings beneath the surface recognition, dawning before any words could leave his mouth. The impact came without warning, a deep, resonant thud against the port side of Blue Horizon that shuddered through every plank of wood. Michael felt it in his bones, a vibration that knocked his knees loose. The boat rocked violently, and in the same instant, Daniel stumbled. His fishing rod clattered to the deck as his body tipped backward, and before Michael could reach him, he was gone over the side. Daniel Michael's voice cracked in the damp air, raw with panic. He lunged toward the rail, gripping it so tightly his knuckles whitened. Cold mist stung his face as he leaned out, catching a fleeting glimpse of his friend's flailing arm breaking the surface. He reached, stretching every inch of himself toward the water. That was when he saw it again, those black and white markings gliding just beneath, a flash of an unblinking, dark eye. The Orca pivoted with startling agility, its massive body curving in the water like a living torpedo. Then the tail came, rising and slamming down with a force that sent a wall of water between Michael and Daniel. The boat pitched hard, nearly throwing Michael overboard. He clung to the side, coughing as the spray hit him full in the face. The water around the boat churned, the once glassy surface now folding into sharp, uneven waves. His eyes darted frantically, searching for any sign of Daniel in the chaos. Out in the fog, several hundred meters away, another vessel was drifting, a small tour boat, carrying passengers eager for a glimpse of marine life. The people on deck had seen the dorsal fin, the lunge, and now the flurry of movement near the fishing boat. Some stood frozen, hands covering their mouths, while a few raised cameras, their instincts unsure whether to record or react. The tour guide, voice trembling, snatched the radio microphone. "This is Sea-Watch 1, she said. Her words rushed. Emergency fishing vessel in distress. Possible Orca attack. Southern Vancouver waters. 5 nautical miles offshore. We need Canadian Coast Guard immediately." Static answered. Then a crackling voice confirmed help was on the way. But for Michael, every second stretched unbearably long. The wind had begun to pick up, tugging at his clothes, carrying the sharp scent of salt and seaweed. Waves slapped against the hull in quick succession, as if the ocean itself had turned restless. He kept shouting Daniel's name, the sound ripped away by the wind before it could travel far. There was no reply, only the rolling mist and the empty space where his friend had been. Michael stayed at the rail, eyes locked on the shifting water, as if sheer willpower could bring Daniel back to the surface. But the cold reality was beginning to settle into his chest, heavier than the damp air around him. About 20 minutes after the call for help, the distant hum of engines broke through the steady roar of the waves. The Canadian Coast Guard vessel emerged from the mist, its red and white hull cutting through the restless water. Michael, slumped against the rail of his boat, could barely lift his head as rescuers climbed aboard. His face was pale, lips trembling from the cold and exhaustion. A sharp pain flared in his arm as one of the crew helped him stand later. They would confirm it was broken. Within moments, Michael was transferred to the rescue vessel, wrapped in a heavy blanket that smelled faintly of fuel and sea air. The crew moved quickly, coordinating with a team of divers already suiting up. Their oxygen tanks hissed in the background as they checked each other's gear, eyes focused, but voices low. Without hesitation, they slipped into the water, their black fins vanishing beneath the surface. The sea had grown more unpredictable. Swells lifted and dropped the boat in slow, heavy motions, and the wind carried droplets of salt that stung the skin. Visibility in the water was poor clouds of sediment, drifted like smoke, stirred by the earlier commotion. Every few minutes, a diver surfaced to report no sign of Daniel, then disappeared below again, on the nearby tour boat. The mood was subdued. The chatter and excitement from earlier in the morning had been replaced by stunned silence. Some passengers stared at the spot where the attack had occurred, as if hoping the water would give something back. Others sat with heads bowed, eyes glassy. A woman named Laura, her voice still shaking, quietly told one of the crew, "I've never seen anything like it. The Orca looked so aggressive. I thought they didn't harm people." Time moved heavily. The cold, the wind, and the uncertainty pressed on everyone aboard. 3 hours after the search began, the crackle of the radio brought a chilling update. Daniel's body had been found 2 kilometers from the site. The words hung in the air, and even the sea seemed to fall momentarily quieter. When they brought him aboard, a heavy silence settled. His legs and torso bore deep, clean tears in the flesh, wounds that told the story no one wanted to hear. Michael sat nearby, wrapped in his blanket, his gaze locked on the deck. His hands gripped the edge of his seat so tightly his knuckles turned white, but his face showed no movement, only eyes reddened and distant, fixed somewhere far beyond the horizon. The Coast Guard moved efficiently, sealing off the area and preparing to transport Daniel's body to the Vancouver morgue for examination. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds in scattered beams, but it did nothing to warm the air. Despite the daylight, the world around them felt muted, heavy with loss. At the Vancouver morgue, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic. Dr. Alice Morgan, a seasoned forensic pathologist, stood over the examination table, her gloved hands moving with steady precision. She had seen her share of tragedies over the years, But there was something unsettling about this case. Daniel Lee's body lay before her, and the marks told a story more violent than anyone had anticipated. She spoke softly into her recorder, noting the extensive blood loss as the primary cause of death. The lacerations were deep and clean, consistent with the sharp, conical teeth of an orca. There was no mistaking it. This was not the aftermath of an accident involving equipment or another boat. It was the direct result of a deliberate, forceful strike from one of the ocean's most powerful predators. Detective Mark Johnson stood nearby, his notepad in hand. He'd been with the department long enough to recognize that this was something extraordinary and disturbing. "So, you're certain?" he asked, his tone quiet, almost reluctant. "Doctor..." Morgan looked up, her expression solemn. "Without a doubt." This was an orca attack. That confirmation led Johnson to call in Dr. Peter Lawson, a marine biologist known for his decades of research on killer whales in the Pacific Northwest. Lawson arrived later that afternoon, his weathered face reflecting years of sea voyages and countless encounters with marine wildlife. After reviewing the details, he explained, orcas almost never attack humans, but when their habitat shrinks and food becomes scarce, they can behave unpredictably. It's rare, but not impossible. By the next morning, the story had spread quickly through news outlets and social media. The public's shock was palpable, and soon the environmental group Ocean Guardians weighed in. Their spokesperson didn't mince words during a live interview. Decades of overfishing, particularly of salmon, have dismantled the food chain. Top predators like orcas are under immense pressure, and what happened here is a symptom of that larger crisis. The comment sparked a storm of debate. Some agreed wholeheartedly, calling for stricter fishing regulations, while others accused the organization of exploiting a tragedy to push an agenda. On online forums, speculation and theories swirled, mixing outrage, fear, and empathy for both the victim and the animal involved. Meanwhile, in Nanaimo, the Lee household was steeped in grief. Sarah Lee, Daniel's wife, quietly went through family photos in their living room, her 2 young children clinging to her sides. Relatives arrived to help with funeral arrangements, but the house remained heavy with silence. The reality of Daniel's absence had only begun to sink in, and for his family, the headlines and debates felt distant compared to the raw, personal pain of loss. 3 days later, the small church in Nanaimo was shrouded in gray light, the steady drizzle outside tapping softly against its windows. The slow tolling of the bell marked the passing moments, each one carrying the weight of a loss too heavy for words. Inside, the air was thick with silence, broken only by muffled sobs. Sarah Lee stood near the front, her black dress clinging slightly from the damp air. Her hands trembled as she rested them on the framed wedding photo placed atop the closed coffin. In the picture, she and Daniel were laughing, their faces lit with the joy of a shared life ahead. Now, those same moments felt unbearably far away. Her eyes, rimmed in red, reflected not just grief, but the exhaustion of the last few days. Her 2 young children clung to her skirt, their small faces pale and confused. They didn't yet understand the permanence of death, only that their father was gone and their home felt quieter, emptier. From the pews, friends, neighbors, and relatives looked on in silence, their expressions a mix of sorrow and helplessness. At the side aisle, Michael approached slowly, leaning heavily on crutches. His arm was still bound in a cast, but the injury to his body seemed insignificant compared to the fracture in his heart. He reached the coffin and placed a bouquet of white lilies on its polished surface. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have kept you safe." The words hung in the air, unchallenged, because everyone knew there was nothing more he could have done. The quiet was punctuated by the sound of raindrops on the church's tin roof. A few rows back, an elderly woman dabbed her eyes, while others sat motionless, their grief expressed in stillness rather than tears. The atmosphere carried a deep, collective ache. Near the end of the service, a local reporter approached Sarah with hesitant steps, his voice low and respectful. "Would you like to share a message?" he asked. She took a moment before answering, her voice strained but steady. "He loved the ocean," she said, her gaze fixed on the coffin. "But the ocean took him from us. If people keep invading the natural homes of wild creatures, more families will know this kind of pain. We can't keep pushing nature to its limits and expect it not to push back." Her words landed heavily, filling the church with a sharp, quiet truth that no one could easily dismiss. Even those who had come simply to mourn found themselves reflecting on what her loss meant for more than just one family. As the service ended, the bell rang again, its sound carried by the damp wind. Outside, the rain continued, mingling with tears, washing over the churchyard as if the sky itself grieved alongside them. Detective Mark Johnson couldn't bring himself to close the case. The official report might have been ready, but something about it felt incomplete. It wasn't just the tragedy of a man lost at sea, it was the question of why it had happened at all. And for Mark, why was the most important piece of the truth? 2 days after the funeral, he returned to the site of the attack with Dr. Peter Lawson. The morning sky was overcast, the water dark and still, as if holding its own secrets. Their small research boat rocked gently as the two men prepared their diving gear. The air was heavy with a quiet determination. Once beneath the surface, the world transformed. The light dimmed, filtering through layers of green-blue water. Mark's eyes scanned the depths while Lawson swam ahead, carrying an underwater camera and a small recorder to capture any marine sounds. The silence was unsettling, not the usual hum of life, but an emptiness that spoke volumes. They soon reached the area where Michael and Daniel had anchored their boat. Lawson paused, hovering near the seabed, and began pointing to fragments of tangled netting caught on rocks. Pieces of old fishing gear lay scattered like forgotten relics, their edges frayed and weathered by years underwater. Plastic debris floated lazily in the current bottles, wrappings, and other remnants of human carelessness. But the most telling sign was the absence. This stretch of ocean had once been alive with salmon, Lawson explained through hand signals and later confirmed on the boat. Now, there were only a few small schools darting between shadows, their numbers nowhere near what the ecosystem needed to sustain its top predators. Back on deck, Lawson reviewed the footage. His voice carried a restrained urgency. "An adult orca needs hundreds of pounds of fish each day," he said. "If their food supply collapses, they're forced to adapt. Sometimes that means approaching boats or shoreline areas they'd usually avoid. In rare cases, people get caught in the middle." Mark wrote down every detail, his notebook quickly filling with observations. He could see the shape of the truth forming. This wasn't just an unpredictable attack. It was a symptom of something much larger. A predator had been pushed to desperation by a chain of events set in motion long before that August morning. As the boat headed back toward shore, the wind picked up, scattering ripples across the water. Mark watched the horizon, his mind already turning over the implications. Daniel's death was not only a personal tragedy, it was a warning sign. A message carried up from the ocean's depths, urging them to pay attention before the balance tipped even further. When the investigation team released their findings, the story erupted across every major news outlet. What had once been a local tragedy was now a national conversation. Evening broadcasts were filled with experts debating in split-screen interviews, marine biologists, fishermen, environmental advocates, and politicians, each speaking with urgency, sometimes frustration. On one side were those who argued that orcas, as apex predators, needed stronger protections. They spoke of delicate food chains, decades of overfishing, and the danger of ignoring nature's warning signs. On the other side, seasoned fishermen voiced their fears. Reduced fishing zones could mean empty nets, lost income, and communities already on the brink pushed closer to collapse. Ocean guardians wasted no time. At a press conference, their spokesperson called for the creation of a marine sanctuary along the affected coastline, with strict limits on salmon fishing and increased patrols to monitor illegal catches. Their proposal was bold, even controversial, but it gained traction among viewers shaken by the tragedy. Michael found himself drawn into the spotlight. Despite his reluctance, invited to speak on a televised interview, he sat in the studio under the harsh glow of stage lights. His voice trembled as he recounted the moment the boat lurched, the cold shock of the water, and the helplessness of watching Daniel disappear. The host played a short clip from Daniel's funeral, Sarah standing by the coffin, her children clutching her skirt, followed by sweeping shots of empty waters where salmon should have been. The images blended grief and urgency into a single, unforgettable impression. Then came the video, shot by a tourist on the whale-watching vessel the day of the attack. It surfaced online and spread within hours. The footage was shaky, but unmistakable. The orca's sleek black and white body surging toward the fishing boat, the violent jolt as it struck, and the explosive force of its tail slamming into the water between the two men. No narration was needed. The gasps of passengers in the background told the story. For some viewers, the video fueled outrage against fishing practices that might have pushed the animal to desperation. For others, it deepened fears that orcas were becoming unpredictable and dangerous. Social media turned into a battleground of opinion, hashtags clashing across timelines. Amid the noise, Mark Johnson quietly continued his work, aware that public opinion could shape policy as much as evidence ever could. But for Michael, the debates felt like a distant storm. No matter how many experts spoke, how many policies were proposed, the simple truth was that his best friend was gone, and nothing could rewrite that moment on the water. On August 10th, 2025, the harbor at Nanaimo was quieter than usual. The morning air carried the faint scent of salt and seaweed, and the only sounds were the gentle clinking of boat masts swaying with the tide. A small group gathered at the edge of the dock. Michael, still walking with the aid of a crutch, Sarah and her two children, members of Ocean Guardians, and a handful of local residents who had come to pay their respects. They stood in a solemn semicircle, holding flowers in their hands. No speeches began immediately. Instead, there was a shared silence, as if everyone was listening for something beneath the lapping of the waves. When the time came, each person stepped forward and let their flowers drift into the water. The blooms floated together, forming a fragile carpet of color that slowly spread across the harbor's surface. Dr. Peter Lawson, standing slightly apart from the group, broke the silence. His voice was low, but carried clearly in the still air. "The ocean has given us so much," he said, "but it never forgets. Every choice we make leaves a trace, and when the balance is broken, nature's response can be devastating." His words hung there, as steady and inevitable as the tide itself. Sarah's gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sunlight danced over gentle waves. There was pain in her eyes, but also a steadiness that hadn't been there before. One of her children tugged at her hand, and she knelt to whisper something only he could hear. She stayed like that for a long moment, her free hand brushing the dock as though to feel its texture, perhaps searching for some kind of anchor. Representatives from Ocean Guardians stepped forward to announce a new initiative. They had reached an agreement with local authorities to restore salmon populations, restrict harmful fishing practices, and remove debris from the sea floor. It was an ambitious plan, one that would take years to see through. But the crowd responded with quiet nods and murmurs of approval. For Michael, the day was not about politics or policy. As he watched the flowers drift farther out, he thought of the mornings he and Daniel had set out together, how the boat had smelled faintly of coffee and bait, how Daniel would hum tunelessly as they prepared their gear. The sea had been their companion then, something alive and boundless. Now it felt more like a teacher, stern and unyielding, reminding them all of its power and fragility. By the time the ceremony ended, the flowers had already begun to vanish into the current. The group lingered for a while, no one eager to be the first to leave. The ocean rolled on, indifferent yet eternal, carrying with it the memory of what had been lost and the warning of what could still be saved. The tragedy off the coast of Nanaimo was more than an isolated incident. It was a warning. The death of Daniel Lee revealed not just the power of the ocean, but the fragile balance that keeps its creatures and humans in harmony. The orca was not a villain, nor was it acting without reason. It was a living reminder that when we take more than nature can give, there will be consequences, sometimes devastating ones. Daniel's story has since been carried far beyond the harbor where it began, becoming a call to protect the waters that sustain life itself. If we want a future where our children can see whales without fear and fish in healthy seas, we must learn to respect the limits of the natural world. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear the lessons the ocean is trying to teach us.